maybe it's a Hotmail account. So welcome everybody. I'm Leela Howe, and I thought it would be useful just to meet, that we should all meet before the forum begins and introduce ourselves to each other. So I'm just going to ask you all to introduce yourself as panelists, who you are to each other, and then I'm going to ask Matthew and Mike just to say a few words of welcome. So I'm Leela Howe. I'm joint chair of the BAME Forum here in Croydon. The forum is a year old, and we're really excited to have been able to organise this series of events, and even more excited and delighted that you've agreed to be our panelists. So thank you very much. I'll leave it to you to introduce yourselves. Okay, Paulette?
Oh, hi, I'm Paulette Lewis. I'm a non-executive director here, NHS Trust. I'm also the chair for the Croydon Black and Minority Ethnic Forum. And I also sit on the Chief Nursing Officer Strategic BME group and other things. I'll just leave it at that for the time being.
Okay, thank you, Paulette. Okay, Mike, I'm just going in terms of my screen. Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike Bell. I'm chairman of the trust down here. That keeps me out of mischief for a while.
Okay. Elizabeth?
Hi everybody, I'm Elizabeth Anionwu. I'm an Emeritus Professor of Nursing at the University of West London.
John?
Hi everybody, I'm John Barnes, ex-Liverpool and England footballer. I've got 2 children working in the NHS. My son is a consultant plastic surgeon up here in Liverpool, and at Preston actually. My daughter is a doctor as well in Manchester, so I have a particular affiliation with the NHS.
Thank you. Somebody's blacked out. Must be Jen. Matthew, can I come to you then?
You can, Leila. Hi, everybody. I'm Matthew Kershaw. I'm Chief Executive here at Croydon Health Services, and something that we call the Place-Based Leader for Health, which means I have an oversight of all things to do with health here in Croydon. I'll say a few words in a second when we've finished introductions.
Okay, Jen?
Oh, hi, I'm Jen Sarsby, co-chair of the BAME group, and I'm fairly new to Croydon. I've been here over 18 months. I've been a nurse for 30 years, and I'm a Black feminist researcher.
Thank you. Okay, so I've heard from Baby Blue. She still hasn't got it. So she wants me to text it to her. I'm going to forward her details on to Andrea so that Andrea can text her the details. So because we don't want the forum to start late, I'm going to ask Matthew and Mike to just say a few words, please, on behalf of Croydon. Thank you.
So thanks, Leila, and I'll start, and I know Mike will add a few words, and I won't take too long. I think the first thing I want to say was thank you to Leila and Andrea for the hard work in setting up tonight. These things don't just happen, they require quite a lot of effort behind the scenes, so I'm really grateful for them for doing this. I have to say that the take-up is high. I think we have over 100 people registered for this evening, which is fantastic. We're putting a real effort this year into Black History Month here in Croydon, bearing in mind Croydon is such a diverse borough, one of the, if not the most diverse in London, and as a result we have a real responsibility, we feel, to ensure that we're focused on equality, diversity and inclusion as a major part of our purpose in life, and celebrating Black History Month this year particularly, following the Black Lives Matters campaign, I think is even more important. So it's a real thank you from myself as Chief Exec to all of you for giving up your time, and I know that it will be a really powerful and informative and important event tonight, with lots of people very interested in hearing your stories and using that as an opportunity to talk about race, which is such an important initiative, and something that we have, as I say, pushed very strongly this year. We've been talking about it consistently before Black History Month, but particularly now during October at all of our staff webinars and various other events to try to make sure that this issue is highlighted and taken as seriously as it needs to be, not least because the NHS has not always done itself proud in this regard. And we've got some a film that Andrea has put together, which has gone down really, really well because it, I think, reflects the experiences of many people in the health service. And part of my job is to highlight that and make sure that going forward we do a darn sight better than we may well have done in the past, whether that's intended or not. The situation hasn't always been as it needs to be, and part of my responsibility is to do everything in my power to try to move that forward. And having you guys alongside to help in that endeavour, I think is just brilliant, and I'm just so grateful for the time that you're spending with us this evening, and I'm really looking forward to listening in and being a beneficiary of the collective experience, knowledge and insight that you guys are going to bring. So thank you for that. I'll hand over to Mike to add in. I'm happy to take questions if there are any from any of you now, but I'll hand over to Mike and then let us get ready for 7 o'clock.
Thanks, Matthew. And like Matthew, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that that we're doing this event. I'm a little bit ashamed that I've been at Croydon since 2013, and this is the first time that we've made a major effort to celebrate Black History Month. We should have been doing it every single year. So a massive, massive thanks to Layla and the comms team for pulling this off and for getting us, getting us John, getting us Baby Blue, and also getting us our stars in London. Elizabeth, it's fantastic that you're with us. Paulette, absolutely great that not only are you speaking today, but that you're part of our board now as a non-executive director and adding really, really, really big value. Matthew touched upon it, but we are the most diverse borough in one of the most diverse boroughs in London. So getting this right isn't just an issue in terms of, this is actually absolutely fundamental to the way in which we work as an organisation. So as we move forward, we need to put tackling health inequalities right at the centre of everything we do. And the health inequalities do cut absolutely acutely upon our black population in Croydon. So what I hope that this month will do, and the series of events that we've got, will galvanise our team in Croydon to feel that they can take action, that they can say the things that maybe before they hadn't been able to say, that we can capture through events like this the energy, the enthusiasm, the skills, the passion and commitment of our staff in Croydon, our black staff in Croydon, and get them to work with us to contribute to a better future for Croydon. So I'm ambitious for what this will do. I'm really excited about tonight. I think it's fantastic. A big thank you to all of you.
You're welcome.
Layla, back to you.
Layla's on mute.
Yeah, Layla is on mute. You have to unmute yourself, Layla.
Okay, sorry. Sorry, you can see I'm good at this. Okay, so we're still hopeful to get Baby Blue, but I'm finally going to turn to Jen. Jen, who's our joint chair of the forum with me, and also one of the speakers tonight, to just say a few words of introduction. Jen's on mute.
She needs a, all right, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Layla. Like most of you have just summarised, it's just been incredible. The last few weeks in pulling this effort together has shown some of the strengths of Croydon, really. When the chips are down, we really pull together. and it shows what we can achieve when we put our heart and soul into something. So I'm really sort of hopeful about tonight, and hoping that we can start that conversation and to make things happen. And as we've seen in some of the videos, what people are asking for is that we move beyond just talking about race, but also in what next? What do we learn from the lessons of the past few months, starting with Grenfell and culminating in COVID? How do we make that a positive experience for us? So thank you, Matthew, and thank you to everyone for kind of pulling together to make this happen. It's a privilege to share this space.
Okay, thank you. So we have 5 minutes before go live, as they say. So if you just want to relax, get yourself a glass of water, do what you need to do before we go live. I'm just really hopeful that in these 5 minutes we are going to get Baby Blue online. I understand, in fact, that most of people who've joined the forum were able to hear those introductions as well. So that's good. So that means my job's going to be much easier when I have to introduce two speakers. So that's great. Okay. I'm just going to call her again and put myself on mute. Okay, I'm pleased to say she's been able to get the link by text message. So hopefully she's going to copy and paste it and join us. And then we'll be ready to start.
Well done, Layla. Perseverance to the end.
Yes. You always know that something would go wrong.
Go wrong.
You just know it. So there we are. It's ironic that the youngest one of us was the one who couldn't log on. Because all of us, you know, at my age, you just panic that it's not going to work for you, and then it does. So
You're playing down your abilities, Layla.
Yes, speak for yourself, Layla.
all right.
Some of us elders cope very well. Thank you very much.
I'm with you, Layla. Not a clue.
Oh, all right.
I've learned. I've got really
I'm
good
just
at
trying to
it.
get on till 4 o'clock just to make sure. I can tell you.
I practice I do the same as actually. I practice. Make sure that I know what I'm about to do.
But there are too many different ways. There's Teams, there's Zoom, there's about 5 different ways of getting on. I just learned Zoom, and then somebody told me about Teams and something else. So
And then Go Meetings. Somebody said
that's the one I just have to
meeting.
download that, yeah.
Yeah, Go Meetings is another one. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Hi there. Layla, I heard your comment about me being the youngest one.
Oh, did you hear it? Oh, sorry. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you guys?
Yeah, we're all well. So, Jen, we've done our introductions. Just very quickly, people will say who they are because it is 7 and we need to start. So I hope that's all right with you, Baby Blue. So we're just going to have to go straight into it.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay, good. All right then. So, first of all, I want to welcome everybody to our discussion this evening. There's just some small housekeeping rules that we just need to establish. The first thing is that this session is being recorded because we do want to share it with all the people who registered today. So if when you ask a question or you want to make a comment, if you wish to be anonymous, will you please say so that you won't be identified in any of the responses that you give. We're going to ask all the speakers to speak and show a short film, and then we're going to have the Q&A session at the end. And the idea is that you'll use the chat to send your questions, and Andrea Stewart, who's been coordinating the IT side of all of this, the techie side of this, is going to collate the questions and send them to me, and then I will ask you, because what we don't want is questions that have been repeated for you to keep being asked the same thing. So hopefully that's going to work very well. So on behalf of the BAME Forum, I'd like to welcome you, the panelists, and all the people who registered to attend today. It's our panel discussion of Let's Talk About Race. I'm your host for this evening. I'm Leela Howe, and I'm one of the joint chairs of the BAME Forum in Croydon. We have a distinguished panel of speakers today. I'm going to introduce you today, Elizabeth Anionwu, to Paulette Lewis, the non-executive director, to Jen Sarsby, the joint chair with me, to Baby Blue, one of the leaders of the demonstrations from Justice for Black Lives, who organised the demonstrations in the summer for Black Lives Matter, and John Barnes, who said I could introduce him how I like, and I realised that's because everybody knows you, John, and you don't need an introduction. So we'll leave it at that for the time being. So thank you all very much. So Mike Bell, our chairman, who kindly said a few words before, made the point which I think I want to make, which is if this is the first time in Croydon that a series of events have been organised to celebrate Black History Month. The idea for our Let's Talk About Race panel came in a series of discussions with the EDI team and our lead, Arlene Brown, about how awareness of racial issues, racial disparity could be raised within our trust. I must say that the possibility of such a debate is because in the last 2 years, there has been a focus by our chief executive in particular to support any initiatives that address the issue of racial equality. And in setting up staff forums, the BAME Forum of which is one, a bottom-up approach to looking at issues has been possible. So thank you, Matthew, thank you, Mike, and to our exec team, and to our sponsors, Nena Osuji and Neil Goldburn, for their active support of our programme for Black History Month. This is also a first in that we're working with our colleagues in the borough, the Croydon BME Forum and Croydon Council, and we have been very pleased to do so. This discussion is held at a time of what has been called a racial reckoning. The murder of George Floyd and the eruption of global protests laid bare the uncomfortable truths of the Black experience here in the UK and the USA. Issues which had previously been dismissed or not taken seriously, these issues now demanded that they be addressed. The impact of COVID on Black and ethnic minorities revealed the impact of racism on our communities and the resulting health and social inequalities. So why is race and the discussion around race still such an uncomfortable topic? Our speakers today will be talking about their experiences and their actions and ideas for change. We hope that a result will be to enable conversations where race is discussed with ease and is no longer a taboo subject. So thank you all very much. So we're going to start with our speakers now. And our first speaker is Dame Elizabeth Anionwu. I asked Elizabeth to be sure that I pronounced her name properly, and I hope I have. As Elizabeth has said, she's the Emeritus Professor at the University of West London, but her biography reads much more than that. I'm one of the people fortunate enough to, when I go for any health screening or any appointments, I get screened for sickle cell anemia. And I do this and this is done for me because of the pioneering work of Dame Elizabeth. Her work, her publications, her commitment to ensuring that this disease, which affects in the main Black people, has been brought to the fore of the medical profession, and action has been taken in order to ensure that our treatment is fair and proper. So I'm going to hand over to you, Dame Elizabeth, and say thank you for your work and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you very much, Leila, and it's a huge honour to be amongst this stellar panel. Thank you very much, and hello, Croydon. I remember last year I had a wonderful time and the hospitality extended to me was brilliant. So what I've been asked to, my title is Breaking Through Despite the Barriers. Sorry, well, it's still the same really. Breaking Through Despite the Odds. And in a nutshell, I want to just quickly go through some early issues in my life, which started out in a slightly difficult way. I actually called my memoirs Mixed Blessings from a Cambridge Union, because I was the outcome of an affair of two students at Cambridge University. One was white, and I think you can see, another one was Black. But my mother, they never got married. And we're talking about 1947. So you can imagine the mores of the day, the stigma, etc. My mother never told her parents, my grandparents, that my father was Nigerian. And they were expecting a white baby to arrive. And so when the midwife turned round to my grandparents and said, it was Irish nuns, by the way, to be sure, the baby's a little dark. I think that was the understatement of the year, to be very honest, because what I've gathered through family folklore, this was just another layer of shock. And we talk today, don't we, of intersectionality. So there was the issue of religion for my family, the working class family, single mother, and then race on top of that. And so for various reasons, my mother never, ever wanted to give me up for adoption. And she fought against that. And I know one of the reasons I've broken through is because of the absolute love of my mother, and that against all the difficulties, we maintained a contact, and well, she looked after me as well as she could, and we maintained contact, positive, loving contact, until the day she died in the year of 2003. However, there were difficulties, so I spent the first 9 years of my life in care in a children's home run by nuns, which on the whole was okay. When this was revealed to many, some of my friends and colleagues, they were amazed. And that's actually, they pressed me to write my memoirs because they saw me as somebody who had achieved, and they were quite shocked when they heard about my early days. And of course, I was quite happy to share my experiences, because we know the situation for many mixed race children from whose parents were not together. And sadly, there have been so many traumatic and negative experiences. So I'm grateful that whilst I had issues, not on the level that we know about. Then my mother always wanted to make a home for me. And when she married an English guy, a white English guy, and I'm putting it in the context of our session this evening, things started off all right. I moved from Birmingham, the children's home in Birmingham, to my mother's home in Wolverhampton, in the council house in Wolverhampton. And for a few months, everything was fine. And then when my mum wasn't around, he started to physically abuse me because his mates down at the pub were teasing him. What are you doing? This is the 1950s now. What are you doing having a half-caste child in your house? So the abuse got worse and worse till the day that it was so bad that my mother came running in because he'd beaten me so much I was screaming and in pain and bleeding, etc. So my maternal grandparents rescued me and I went up and lived in the northwest of England. But one positive thing that came out of my experience in the children's home was that that's where I decided to be a nurse, because I had very bad eczema, and there was a particular nun who I called the white nun. Well, actually all the nuns were white, but this particular nun wore a white habit instead of a black habit. And she treated my eczema in a beautiful way without causing any distress, any pain. She used distraction therapy. The convent, you know, I was just doused with religion, let's just say that. So to hear a nun using the word bottom to distract me from the pain, you know, I just thought it was so rude and just burst out laughing. And she took the dressing off and I didn't feel it. Whereas with the other nuns, I would just run away because it associated them with pain, I'm afraid. So that's why I became a nurse. And I often think back to the impact we're making on children without realizing it, and how it can influence their lives negatively or positively. Fast forward, because I know we've only got a few minutes. I became a health visitor and I was in Brent, and one of the families I visited had a young boy with sickle cell anemia. Now the mother told me that she was very happy with the medical care, but she couldn't get hold of any information. She did, though, think that the child was definitely going to die before he was 12. But I didn't know about the illness. I wasn't taught about the illness in my nursing course in the late 60s, and I wasn't taught about it in my health visiting course in London in the early 70s. When I met this mother who was looking to me for support, a bit more information, which I couldn't give her, that made me feel useless, helpless, but it made me feel angry. And looking back, and when I read President Obama's Dreams from My Father, his first autobiography, we're all waiting for his second one, aren't we, at the moment? He talked about how it was pointed out to him that he must be angry about things because he was a middle-class guy from Hawaii. What's he doing wanting to be a community organizer in Chicago? You must be angry about something. And that was a light bulb moment for me because it made me realize what has driven me in my life is anger. However, I really think I've used my anger positively rather than negatively. I see racism creating a lot of negative anger, understandably, but that anger is used against the individual and it can affect relationships and career prospects and all sorts of things. So I think anger is good, but I think anger should be used positively. And my anger was directed, just to finish now, in terms of sickle cell campaigns with others, always working as a team, of course. And finally, with the Mary Seacole Memorial Statue Appeal. So we've got the wonderful statue now in the grounds of St. Thomas's Hospital. And I think I will finish there, Layla, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. That really just fits the bill of what we wanted. Adversity, how you deal with it, and what you can then, and the creativity that you can get from, as you say, turning your anger into something else. So our next speaker is the non-executive director. I think I've been told that all our informal discussions were held to all of those who were logging on, so I'm not going to belabor the point too much of who people are. But Paulette Lewis, she's chair of the Croydon BME Forum. She's the member of the Chief Nurses Strategic BME Forum. And of course, she's one of the non-exec directors of the Trust of Croydon University Healthcare Trust. So I'm going to hand over to you, Paulette. I know you want to talk about In My Shoes.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight to talk about wearing my shoe or being in my shoe. That's very interesting because of the journey which brought me here today. But firstly, talking about race and racism, from my return to England, I was here at the age of 3, and my parents took us back to Jamaica because she felt at the time, and my parents, what was happening to my brother and ourselves in schools, she could not take it, and she didn't feel we were going to get the best opportunity. And I returned to do nursing because I always wanted to be a nurse. And having met a white nurse in my grammar school who told us how wonderful it was to be back in England, I came back. So talking about race and racism is difficult for some of us to talk about. And it makes us feel somewhat uncomfortable. But by talking about race and racism, we are saying we're willing to experience some of that discomfort in recognition of how important it is to put this on the table and have that open and honest discussion. We do need to talk about race because everything we do has a connotation of race. It is about the decisions we make. With Black Lives Matter and with COVID, race has come to the forefront of our discussion. Race plays a significant role, explicitly or implicitly, in many things we do. Our social life, our profession, where we live, who we speak to, where we live. And racism and how people deal with race sometimes is subtle, which I have experienced. But it also has the power to shape and influence and control individuals' attitude, values, and behavior. No matter how we think about race, it impacts on everybody's life. Every person, regardless of your race or ethnicity or background, should be able to live and feel and given all the opportunity to excel in whatever they want to do. For me, I put on my shoe when I first came here and it was comfortable. As a junior nurse, it was fine. As I climbed the ladder, my shoe became tighter. Why? People started to treat you differently. As you worked on the wards, you find out that your performance was never good enough. You had to be that 100% better. I left and went to America, went to university, came back, and I wanted a job. And I started looking for a job. Everyone I went to, I was always picked to the post. My shoe then became tight, and I felt I needed to pick them off and don't wear them because I was just being stifled with these tight shoes. But the person who has taught me most as my role model is my mother, who says, you never give up, you never quit. So after my interview, one interview, I had many interviews, I rang the lady and said to her, I'd like some feedback. And she said to me, yes, I'm quite happy to give that to you. And I said, why did I not get this job? I've been for so many. Well, I think you were too qualified. And I don't think you're going to stay here very long. You have so much to offer. I think somewhere else, you might stay a bit longer. So I challenged her, because my mother brought us up to be quite confident young ladies. And I said, well, tell me a little bit more. If I'm so good and I have got so much to offer, why would you not want me in your organization? And she went very quiet. I said, I really don't understand that. But tell you what, since you're telling me I'm so good, I am going to take that feedback and turn that into something positive. You see, adversity is a great teacher. It helps you to turn around the negative into positive. So what did I do? I went off, and instead of applying for a sister's post, I decided to apply for a manager's post. So I said, my friend said, what? I said, I'm going for an I grade, not a G grade. They said, you're mad. I said, well, I keep being turned down. I'm always picked to the post. I'm going to see what is so different. And I did that. And to my astonishment, that was a breakthrough. I actually got the call that I got the job, and I just nearly died. I couldn't believe it. because I took that negativity and I said, I am not going to give up. I'm going to keep going. And I broke through. But it doesn't always happen that way. When I then became a senior manager, we reorganizations of most establishment, people always say the Black and minor ethnic people are always going to be dropped out of those posts. And it did happen to me. I was made redundant twice. My struggles, the tightness of my shoe, taking it off, putting it on back. And every time I put it on and felt comfortable, something came back to make it even tighter. So I did all the work, we did all the things to close the hospitals. I was told, you will now be interviewed, both of you, as active maternity services for the job. A few days before that, I was told it won't happen. And I said, why? Well, they really felt that the person that was in that job, who was a white lady, she was been there for a very long time and so forth. And honestly, again, I thought, well, this is just not on. But it happened. I was made redundant and I went home. And while I was at home, again, race and people, a lovely white man, I didn't know him, he called me and said, I heard about you. Because I put it this way, we don't always blow a trumpet, but I was good at what I did. And my outcomes were really very good about what I did. And he offered me, he said, come in, I'm looking for someone to do some work, would you come along? Those two white men changed my life in making me realize that there was more to me than I thought. But by that time, I was feeling as though I wanted to give up on everything. But I didn't. And I'm here today with the support of those people who believed in me. So what I would say is we need to have a deep belief in our own dignity and worth, which I had to pull on, and don't feel that you're nobody. Because at one time, I did feel that way. Determination is also very important. To achieve what you want to be, you have to be determined and not giving up. And whatever you do, as my mother would say, you be the best of that. So when I fought my fights, one day, I had to have a discussion with a senior manager because I felt I was being treated really very badly. And she came to the door and she said, oh, there you are again, and made very slight. And I said, would you like to come in and sit down? And she sat down. And I said, I need to talk to you. And she listened. And I explained exactly how she was making me feel, all the things she was doing. And as I spoke to her openly and honestly from my heart, the tears rolled down her eyes. And I thought I would be sacked the next day. So I packed everything in my cupboard and went home with most of the things I had. The next day I came back, there was a bunch of flowers waiting for me. And she came in the office and said, I never thought about what I was doing, and I didn't understand the impact I had on you. So for me, it's about not refusing to give up. And how do we share the understanding and what we're going through with those people? Because sometimes I don't think people understand. If you don't walk in my shoe, and if you don't walk in my shoe, walk with me. Walk with those people who are experiencing the adversity which is happening. And take the experiences and turn them into something positive. But for me, most of all, again, I think my time is coming to a close, is that are we speaking to the right people? A lot of time we're speaking to ourselves, the people who are experiencing it, the people who are going through the issues consistently. We have to have strategies in place to speak to those people. I mentor those two white men. They would come and have coffee with me on a weekly basis for me to explain what I was talking about in dealing with race, equality, inclusion. And they actually started to understand their organization changed. We can't be talking to ourselves. Black History Month is important. We need to do it and we need to have everything going about it. But we need to sit around the table with those people who don't understand. We need to educate them. We need to involve them. We need to speak with them, because all the things I went through later, and when I talk about it, some people told me, and many of my colleagues said to me, I don't know how you have lasted this long in those posts. And I said, because of determination, and I am good. I am worth it. And how do we instill that into those other people? That's part of what I'm doing now. It's not about how much I earn or what I pay. I want to make sure I influence, I make a difference. I motivate and work with those people. We need to sit around the table and speak to all race, everyone. Because sometime in my journey, when I sit with people and explain and show them, then they understand a bit more. It's a long time we've been talking about race. And it's time we do make some difference. Lip service is not enough. I would like to see where there are positive changes, because 200 years still now. So what is so difficult? Why can't it happen? And I want to be a part of that change as I work and walk with you, and as you walk with me, walk within my shoe as well. So I'm sure if we continue on this pathway of working together, listening, taking the experiences from those people who have gone through so much, but have not given up. I mentor, I coach. I'm always there when the phone goes to pick up the phone and speak to someone in distress. I have helped many not to give up. We as a race are important. Why are we important? The demographic of this country, the demographic of Croydon is changing. Who is going to be there in the future? The race is important. We have to embrace the diversity which is rich, because in every way they're going to bring something positive to make this organization and all organizations a better place to work and be. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So both from Dame Elizabeth and from you, Paulette, we've had two very, very kind of inspiring people who've shown against the odds that their determination, courage and commitment has made a difference to all of us. So for that, I thank both of you. I'm now going to move on to Jen. We are going to show the film, but the IT honcho has said that we'll do it after you've spoken, Jen. So I'm going to hand over to Jen Sarsby. Jen, as I've said, is the joint chair of the forum with myself and Andrea Benjamin. She's worked in the NHS for 30 years. She's the winner of the Queen's Nurses Award and a passionate campaigner on issues of social justice, race and gender. So over to you, Jen, and please go and unmute.
Thank you. Thanks, Leila. I was just listening to the story of Dame Elizabeth and Paulette, and it kind of take me back to one of my early conversations about race. I'm drawn back to, I think it was 6 months into my nurse training, back in the late 80s. And the consciousness of race equality was one that kind of got me into a bit of trouble. But very early on, we pulled a group of our student nurses came together of all races, Irish nurses, white nurses, Jamaicans, and we came together with the idea that we could make a difference. And it was round about the time of Nelson Mandela, and we were going to do so much and we were going to change the world. And so we came together and we formed a group which we felt would be the consciousness of the NHS. And very early on, I think at the second meeting, we decided that we wanted to look at a list of companies that we wouldn't engage with. And we started going through those companies, and then we talked about Barclays Bank. And then it suddenly dawned on us that one of the issues we had, that most of us had our student loan with Barclays, so we couldn't really boycott. So we kind of moved on to different ideas. But very early on, what that taught us, that in having conversation about race, and as Paulette has mentioned before, that needs to happen with all of us. It can't be in isolation. So as we move to look at the biographies of our colleagues, we see that in some ways it's the story of all of us, particularly for those who of immigrant descendant, and we can see the echoes of the personal and professional journeys for us. So what I want to do is to share with you some of the conversations that I've had with nurses as part of my own health research and my own experience in terms and encounter with difference in racism. So when we reflect on experiences of the past, that helps us to make sense of the present and create a space for interrupting injustice and inequities of racism. So it is of some interest, as we've noted before, that despite the historical context and the contribution of Black nurses in the NHS, we have been the object of research and not the subject of research. And so as we entered this debate, one of the things we need to open up a space is how we seek to address those inequalities, and starting with the research that tells the story of our lives and our achievements, and also challenge those unconscious bias. So speaking from a Black feminist perspective, this year we know that the celebration of Black History Month took on a more poignant perspective, not least, as Layla mentioned before, the issues of Grenfell, Black Lives Matter. We know the Windrush experience, and more recently COVID. I do recall looking at those images of Black and minority ethnic nurses, porters, administrators, and those images tell a powerful and compelling history lessons that challenge all of us to stand up together and ensure that the next generation of Black nurses, Black men, women, boys, girls, never live in moments like we've seen in Grenfell, and of course the images, those powerful images of George Floyd. On the other hand, those events have opened up a space where we are here today, and perhaps without those, we would not have an easy gateway to these conversations. And so as we begin to come together and share our stories, we are indeed constructing the ideas that shape all our racial identities and the interconnectedness that drives us, whether it's the quiet anger, or the discomfort, or the challenges, or having those doors closed and the shoes not quite fitting together. So each time when we open up the debate about racial injustice, we interrupt those structural elements of unconscious bias. Whether we're talking about the socially constructed ideas of the strong Black women, as sometimes I'm often referred to. And I often challenge those ideas, because when I'm referred to as a strong Black woman, it doesn't enable others to see my vulnerabilities and the challenge and the trying and the closed doors. So it's about how we challenge those. In recent times, the conversations about Black lives have become fraught, and it has become a contested space about, and very synonymous about, whose lives should matter. This distraction is one which prevents us from looking at the needs of inclusion and representation and equal opportunities. So how do we move these conversations forward? My own experience of race growing up as a child in Jamaica was shaped somewhat by the post-colonial conditions, being brought up and raised by a mother of Black African descent and a father with very strong Syrian Jewish heritage. And so very early on, I became very, very conscious of those differences and lived those differences. And for those of us who are familiar with the context of Jamaica, it's a country of difference. And it, you know, you do notice those. So for me, the idea of race and challenge and has never been a straightforward one. And I think it's a legacy which I've carried with me throughout my whole life, and both professionally and personally. So for me, it's become a force for good, because differences either create a space where you can become very displaced and you become angry and you look inwards, or it can become that anger that drives you to move on. And in my own conversation with nurses, in my own research, and we talk about how do we interrupt the unconscious bias, how do we move on? And what Black NHS workers talk about is, we need to start from a position that we all have unconscious biases. And that's the beginning of the conversation. We need ideas on interrupting unconscious bias. We're not new, but we need to have those positive conversations, that we're not shaped by negative encounters as those that we've listened to, but a space where we can have those in a meaningful way and come to resolution. We might not always do. Equal access to education, professional development that consolidate those experiences. I'm minded in my own research, I know that a number of us do find it difficult after leaving post-education to consolidate those experiences. But it's about how do we make inclusion in the NHS a positive one, and to move and to lead, becoming the subject of research rather than the object, invest in training that enable us to talk and to share ideas and search for solutions together without the constraints of political correctness, and to use the platform to challenge racism and inequalities within the workplace in a way that enable us to grow together. Participants in my own research draw attention to the paradox where attempts to discuss issues relating to race within the workplace often stems from those negative encounters and those experience of discrimination. But on the other hand, some of my non-Black colleagues also found it difficult because they couldn't understand why race in the workplace should matter. And unless you've lived those experiences, unless you've walked in those shoes, then you wouldn't necessarily know. So let's open that space so that they can learn about it, and today won't be just a one-off. We learn, and we've seen those juxtaposition are not always representative of everyday lives, but we know that it's a position that should not be ignored. We want to learn the lessons from the past in a way that helps us to understand each other and to build on those encounters. When we close down conversations about race, we simply reproduce the narrative of silence and leave room for misunderstanding and ambivalence. But equally, the conversation about race cannot be meaningful unless it's inclusive of all races and gender, and leave room again for some ambivalence when positions are not clearly defined. So NHS workers of all races who hold a position of power, as we've seen tonight, have a duty of responsibility and to ensure that issues of inequalities and unconscious bias are enshrined within the values that we espouse in our working lives when we're caring for others. And it should be the yardstick from which we pride ourselves on how well we're doing. I think it would be remiss of me not to pay some tribute to the Windrush generation of nurses for their extraordinary contribution to the NHS, because without them, perhaps we would not have had this platform from which we can speak. And we read with some painful memories some of the difficulties when they tell their stories and experience. We can only glean what that might be like. So this year, the reflection on Black History Month, the images that we've seen, we can also draw on the achievements also. We look at our Black sporting heroes, our scientists, our doctors, nurses, engineers, our entrepreneurs. It is always a sobering reminder of the incredible sacrifice of those whose tireless commitment in the areas of hospital catering, cleaning and security. We always forget to talk about them, our porters, our IT workers, everyone, all the black contributions from our NHS employees. It is also, I'm mindful as we come to a close, I'm mindful of the time, that it is also quite difficult to escape the political binaries of race. So I know that it's not an easy conversation. And as I draw on my own experience that I've spoken about and coming to a close, I'd like for us to move this conversation as not just a space and a time for Black History Month, but something that we continue throughout the year and something that we work together to remove the exclusion and otherness that creates inequalities in all our lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jen. I think some of the points that you touched on, hopefully we'll have a discussion about. One most definitely is about the debate going forward, and many people I think have made the point of it just being a month in the year when these issues are rigorously discussed, and then for the rest of the year it goes to bed. So I think that's a point very well made. So what we're going to do now is show a short film before we go to our final two speakers, Baby Blue and John Barnes. So we made this film because we wanted to share the experiences of Black staff in the Trust, not just their working lives, but their experiences from childhood and through their careers. We wanted it to raise awareness of who they were and the issues that they face as workers in the NHS. And this is around the discussion which is very current at the moment, which is about bringing your whole self to work. That when we come to work, all our experiences, our historical experiences, our experiences in our communities, we don't leave them behind and we don't become this NHS worker that's devoid of all these experiences, which influence our reactions, our actions, and how we interact with people. So the film we're going to show now, it's for 5 minutes. It was made by our comms team. Andrea Stewart in particular had a key role in it. And I hope again that you'll find this enlightening, as have many people. I went on YouTube and saw 1,000 people had seen it. I was a bit taken aback by that, but never mind. So here's the film.
I was stopped a number of times by the police and I didn't quite understand why.
Things do happen to our Black brothers and sisters.
I reflect on what happened and I was treated differently.
At the age of 3, my mum and my dad decided to go back home to Cameroon because her father was ill. My mum decided to bring me back over here, which is where we came when I was 15.
I was first brought to the UK when I was a baby, before a year old, with my parents, who then stayed for several years before going back to Nigeria.
I'm originally from Jamaica. I came here in 2001. The first night I came, it was on a Sunday, and it was so cold, and I cried, and I said, I'm going home back the next day, but 20 years and I'm still here.
When I came for my A-levels, I went to a small village in Devon, and at that time, it was a novelty to the people in the area to come out and look at us as we walked to church. At the time, it didn't really mean much. It's only when I look back as I got older that I realized what it was about.
I have known family members, friends who have come here and struggled to the bone, especially men, Black men, you know, that been stopped.
Oh no, the film's not working.
By the police.
The first time I bought a BMW, it was literally driving back from the showroom. I was pulled over by the police. One of the police officers came back and said, oh, he's got no priors. Another one said, well, there's a first time for everything. And I'm thinking, what do you mean there's a first time for everything. Why can't it be that I haven't done anything and I'm not planning to do anything?
When I started in the NHS, I didn't recognize any particular issues. But through the years, there were some subtle differences in the way that I might be treated compared to my fellow colleague.
I remember going for a job before and somebody else got it, in my opinion, because they were from a British background.
It took me 5 years to get on a training course that people asked for. Some people didn't even ask for, and they were being able to go on the courses.
The NHS has tried to work hard over the years to put in place a range of opportunities.
What we found is NHS is changing, and because people are more aware of the issues that are within the NHS, it is now a lot better for people of my background to be able to achieve what they need to achieve.
I think the Black Lives Movement is a good thing because it makes us more aware of what is going on out in our community.
The origin of the movement, it did have an impact on me. Watching that video was quite, I just couldn't believe that people would do that anyway.
Institutional racism exists everywhere, and until it's acknowledged, and when I say acknowledged, it's not by talking, but actually let's begin to change what we are seeing.
Black History Month means a lot for me because knowing where I'm from and understanding my history and where I am coming from as a Black woman, it means a lot to me.
Black History Month is about, and rightly so, because these people are really very important people. The Mary Sickles, like Nelson Mandela, but actually there are the Mansa Musas and others that people are not necessarily aware of.
I tend to take my family home, back to Cameroon, to make sure that they are also able to experience the culture. And when we go home, we don't get any special dispensations like air conditioning, that sort of stuff. I want them to experience what it's like over there and to enjoy the natural environment over there.
What I would say to young Black men and women is that they need to stay true to their values. They should hang on to hope because change is coming.
Grab everything that you can get, where education and all that to better yourself. There's loads of opportunity here. If you look for it, you will find the opportunity.
Being a father of three, I'm constantly telling them that they need to be aware that they need to work extra hard. I know it's something that was rammed into me, but it's just something I feel like I have to pass on. So what I keep instilling in them is they need to work as hard as possible and be the best that they can be. So far as they do their best, I'm more than happy with whatever they're doing.
Okay, thank you. I really apologize for the glitching and the buffering that was going on in the video. I hope you were still able to take something from it. It is on YouTube, and of course will be available after the screen, after our forum today. So you will have an opportunity. So the next speaker is Baby Blue. So when we discussed the forum, we realized that it was impossible to have a forum like this without acknowledging the summer months, the mass demonstrations that took place for Black Lives Matter, the issues that were raised with hundreds and thousands of young people, both black and white, taken to the streets to protest racial inequality and demanding change in Britain. Baby Blue is one of the members of Justice for Black Lives, who are the group, and you may have seen it on BBC, of young women who organise these demonstrations in the summer. And so I'm going to hand over to you now, Baby Blue, for you to talk to us, tell us your experiences and your hopes for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. I'm feeling very honoured to have been part of this conversation today. I really appreciate it. Just a bit of my background. I'm co-founder of an organisation called Justice for Black Lives. I have a background in anthropology and specifically in decolonising gender. And Justice for Black Lives was birthed out of the protests. We organised the protests that John Boyega spoke at, which, you know, carefully socially distanced around 20,000 people. We then went on to formulate this organisation that is at its basis youth-led, intersectional and abolitionist. So just to explain that a bit, intersectionality is the idea that any given individual may experience an overlapping of minoritized experiences. So you could be a black woman, and in that way you would experience both misogyny, sexism, and racism. And those prejudices will often be interlinked with each other. Or for example, if a black man who is disabled, you experience both racism and ableism on personal and systemic levels. So in this way, at Justice for Black Lives, when we advocate for the lives of Black people, we have to account for the overlapping experiences that are part of Black life. In terms of abolitionism, Justice for Black Lives demands for a divestment of police and prison funds into local communities, because we believe that turning our attention to how our world could change for the better if we focused on the ways in which we can prevent crime from happening, instead of treating the symptoms of crime. For example, we believe that the divestment of police funds into better housing conditions, better funded schools, and community safety groups trained in mental health and de-escalation are the ways in which we can create a society where we do not look up the problems of society, we, rehabilitate and make their lives better. To give a brief summary of Black liberationism, because it's so important to acknowledge the past when we are doing these movements. Black people have been in Britain for over 400, 500 years. But since the Windrush generation, there has been such an increase in activism because of the white supremacy so embedded in British culture. And I think acknowledging the presence of the Black civil rights movement in the UK allows us to emphasize that the Black Lives Matter movement currently is not an American issue. Touch on some of the revolutionary work that has gone before us. We have to note the feats of the late Darcus Howe and his wife Leila, who I'm so privileged to be amongst tonight. Darcus Howe was a Black revolutionary born in Trinidad and heavily influenced by Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael. In 70s Britain, he pioneered the trial of the Mangrove Nine, a trial to imprison the Black British Panthers for defending the close of the Mangrove restaurant. Later, he and Leila, amongst Linton Kwesi Johnson, Barbara Beast, and Farouk Dondi, set up Race Today, a magazine collective that supported and published workers' rights campaigns, led the New Cross Fire March and the Brixton Riot. And it's so important to recognise this big part of British history. And I think that we have to acknowledge the reasons why it's left out. It's tactical that young people today are taught about Tudors and monarchs instead of learning about this vicious history that Britain has with Black and brown people in this country because it prevents us from knowing our history enough to make a stand, take a stand about what's happening currently today. And the protests that happened in May 2020 were the result of many things, but obviously the death and the lynching of George Floyd was a trigger point for the protests worldwide. And I would just like to acknowledge that this was the biggest civil rights movement globally to date. And I think in Britain, it wasn't just the story of George Floyd, but it was the death of Belly Mujinga, the death of Shukri Abdi, Mark Duggan, and sadly, 1,500 others who have been murdered by police in the UK. And just to outline how the protest transpired, I think the presence of social media was a major factor in why these protests gained so much traction. Advertising these campaigns and these protests online and sending them out was such a quick way to get a whole host of people together, but also in documenting black history in the making, essentially. And to give a bit of clarity about the organisational setup, BLM UK was a group that was founded in 2016, and they organised protests in 2016, and they gave a lot of advice, as well as another group called BLM London, which is now Tribe Named Atari. BLM UK hold around £1 million and intend to put this into local communities and local charities for Black people. But they are also supported by an organisation called Forefront, who are a charity that act as responsible adults for young, usually Black kids in Tottenham, who have a very big campaign to defund police. There was an issue of violence at the protest that happened in London this summer. And throughout the protest, we were encouraging young people to have controlled rage. One of the speakers earlier spoke about how it's very valid for us to feel angry, but the ways in which we deal with this anger and express this anger need to be organised and controlled. And so we tried to deal with that with safety measures. We actually cancelled the protest that happened when the National Front and Tommy Robinson came out on that day to prevent any major violence from sparking, but obviously there was some that happened. Some of the takebacks that we had from the protests were the presence of white people. The presence of white people at our protests has really meant that the Black youth of today have been able to have these conversations with their peers and to hold people to account in ways that I don't think generations before us have been able to do. Because of our proximity to white people, there are a lot more Black people in schools, in London especially. We have best friends that are white, and so these conversations can now arise. But it's also, there's been a space that white people, that this movement has created, where white people, we can hold them to account. That even if they say that their intentions were not to upset us, that we can still say that their unconscious bias or the remnants of white supremacy are still present. And in order to have these friendships with them and interactions, that we have to re-educate and unlearn our biases. And I was a hesitancy to do that at first, because a lot of the time, or still is, a lot of the time, people perceive the pro-Black movement to be anti-white, because historically, pro-white movements have always been anti-Black. But allyship requires an unlearning of white supremacy and a recognizing that racism is not just a Black issue. This will require in Britain a education surrounding African cultures before enslavement, educating oneself on enslavement from an abolitionist perspective, on looking at the Haitian Revolution and the feat of Sam Sharpe in Jamaica, to learn about colonialism and post-colonialism and the Windrush generation, the civil rights movement in the UK, in a way that outlines why things like the Windrush scandal of Grenfell Tower happen. So I think that, a big takeaway from this movement currently is that, we can hold white people or non-Black people to account. That accepting that if a Black or brown person tells you that something is racist, no matter your intention, just accept it. Because the more tightly we cling to our identities of being the good person, the more skilled we become at rationalizing our behavior and the less we are able to examine the ways in which we cause harm. And that goes for all of us who experience some degree of privilege, whether that be because we're heterosexual or not disabled or men, or we're not refugees, or we haven't been in prison, we're upper class. We must take it upon ourselves to speak out against injustice on every occasion, whether that be at work, train, in the park, and uplift the voices of those who are minoritized. I wanted to highlight as well that at Justice for Black Lives, we're transitioning from protests into community outreach work, because we recognize that this battle for Black revolution is not going to happen with us just going out and screaming about it. We need to make these changes in our communities and mobilize our communities. So we have a project that's actually piloting in Lives Not Knives, which is a youth club in Croydon, above Zara in Central. And our pilot project is a Black History Month pop-up, where we're going to be giving a workshop to these young people to take them out of their everyday lives, but also to educate them on Black British history. Also recognizing that the day-to-day experience of any Black person is activism in and of itself, to recognize that we are constantly creating Black history, and to take pride in that. But come January 2021, we're looking to have this project spanning across 3 months, working closely with these young people, building the relationships that they might not have outside of these 4 walls of Lives Not Knives, and creating a better environment for Black liberation to thrive, because it's not going to happen in our schools. But the Black community think that Justice for Black Lives and many of the other Black liberation groups that we work with are really focused on healing. There are so many symptoms of racism that have manifested themselves in the Black community. For example, colorism, the fact that many of the speakers tonight who have made great feats in Britain are lighter skinned is no coincidence. The fact that I'm able to speak here is no coincidence. And it's an issue that we really need to address in our community. But also homophobia and queerphobia in our community is something that we really need to recognize is a part of division, because once Black people are stratified, there is more ability for white supremacy to seep in and exercise its control. But other things in our community that we need to address are things like Black mental health. There are so many mental health problems, you know, that the NHS can see, the disproportionate rates of Black people in mental health institutions. But that is because of the generational trauma that is passed down through enslavement. White people have not only had a financial head start of 500 years, but a spiritual head start of 500 years because of the oppression that they were able to enact upon Black people. And I think that that's something that we need to recognize and account for. Addiction is a really big thing in our community, and you know, whether that's an addiction to weed or an addiction to shopping or food, those are things that are very present in the Black community, and that is a way to show activism in your everyday life. But I just suppose the Black future for Justice for Black Lives and many of the other Black liberation groups is a future of community, of decolonization, re-education, and then business. It's something that sees our spiritual and our care for each other, our spiritual understandings of each other and our care for each other to be the primary basis for Black liberation. And then businesses, Black businesses will boom, and we can progress the financial weight of the Black liberation movement alongside that. But yeah, I'm really thankful that Leela has given me this opportunity to speak, and I thank the other speakers for giving their experiences as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Baby Blue. I think many of us who've seen the protests have been thinking, what is the next stage for Black Lives Matter? Because after the protests, a lot of us who've been active in previous movements before think, what next? Where is this activism leading? And so your talk really has given us more of an insight into that and into your agenda. So we come to our final speaker now, John Barnes. When I contacted John to ask how he wanted to be introduced, he said I could introduce him in whichever way I wanted. So I'm not going to attempt to talk about his footballing career because I think that might be a bit of a disaster. But I just want to say why we asked him. Personally, and I know for other people, during the time, particularly when there was racism in football, you were one of the people who said over and over again that we shouldn't be holding our hands up in horror at individual acts of racism, that we needed to look at it as systemic, that it needed to be looked at in terms of the structure, and that we needed to kind of get over this, the way we have of every time there's an incident on a football pitch or an incident in society, we look at it as an isolated way, and then all the commentators and pundits begin to discuss that as an isolated issue. And you've consistently said, no, that's not the way to view it. So that's why we invited you, John, and we're very, very pleased that you were able to be part of this today. And with that, I'm going to hand over to you. You need to come off mute.
Yes, I've just unmuted myself because, of course, with Baby Blue being very young, she knows how to operate computers. But with me, I've been on here since 4 o'clock just to make sure I got it right. Thank you very much for having me on. I think what we've heard tonight are different experiences from different people in different industries. We've listened to Baby Blue. And I think what we found out is that it's not just football, and it's not just the police, and it's not just pop stars, and it's not just black people who can't get Oscars, but that is what society is trying to tell us. And that is why we're going down this route of the conversation that started 2 months ago seems to have died down, apart from we've thrown it at the feet of footballers needed to kneel, Lewis Hamilton needing to get more black people in motorsport, and society is absolving itself of responsibility to look at itself and say this is an endemic and systemic problem throughout society. And they're absolving themselves of responsibility because they're quite happy for it to be thrown at the door of football. So we can all tell you about the experiences we've had, and I think we've all gone through similar experiences. So I'm not even going to start telling you about what I went through as a footballer. I'm looking for the solution to the problem. And the solution to the problem, as far as I'm concerned, while it's a very complicated and nuanced solution, we have to dismantle the idea of racial hierarchy. We have to know where it came from, how it started. This is for the NHS. This is for people, a lot of medical people there, not a lot of nurses. As you know, with any disease, you have to treat the cause, not the symptoms. And I think all we're trying to do is treat the symptom. George Floyd is a symptom. What is the cause of racism? What is the cause of racism is the idea of one group of people being superior to another. I'm glad Baby Blue brought into the context the situation v women, v gays, transsexuals, because it is completely understandable why there's discrimination towards them, because of the lies that have been told about those groups of people for hundreds of years. Women, gays, black people, since 9/11 Muslims. The narrative has been these people are inferior. And for hundreds of years, if you keep subliminally putting in people's minds and consciousness that these people are inferior, here we are now in 2020, trying to come up with a solution, and we think it's as simplistic as saying, you know, everything you've learned for 200 years, it's wrong. Why? Because we're all the same. I think that's a little bit too easy. And there's no way we're going to get to the root of the problem by taking that simplistic approach. So we have to dismantle the idea of racial hierarchy. And of course, as history will tell you, and we talk about slavery a lot in terms of engendering racial discrimination due to slavery. Something that was even more impactful was colonialism. Slavery was a private enterprise. Colonialism was a governmental exercise where Britain and France and Germany and Europe, in the scramble for Africa, completely dominated the continent of Africa and had to come up with this narrative that these people are inferior. And that is when racism got into the mainstream of society. Slavery between 1600s and 1830s, 1850s, white people in England didn't know anything about slaves. They knew they benefited from it, be it through sugar, be it through trade, but that triangle trade, they didn't come into contact. They didn't have an idea about what black people went through in the Caribbean or in America. So to then say that's when slavery started, that's when racism started, you really had to justify exploitation, wholesale exploitation of Africans in the mainstream. And that's when the whole idea of Queen Victoria being the Empress of India and us colonizing and civilizing Africans, that is when racism came into the mainstream. So due to expediency, due to the fact that you wanted to exploit people, you had to come up with this narrative of racial superiority and racial inferiority. And that's when it really started. And we don't pay enough attention to that. We pay a lot of attention to slavery, but we don't pay enough attention to colonialism, which has negatively affected many more black people than slavery. If you're talking about how many hundreds of millions in Africa. So that's the first thing. Now, what is the solution? The solution is to change the perception of black people, of women, of, and I'm sure Baby Blue will endorse this, of gays, of whatever different groups of people we have. So I say it is completely understandable to begin with why people are racially biased. Now, the intersectionality, as Baby Blue spoke about, you can look at it from the point of view of me being from Jamaica and Layla's husband being from Trinidad. What was I told about Trinidadians as a Jamaican? What experiences did I go through as a light-skinned middle-class Jamaican whose mother's family, with alongside Alexander Bustamante and Norman Manley, started the first government? Ken Hill and Frank Hill, my grandfather, being middle-class white Jamaican, nearly white Jamaicans, and of course, me being a middle-class boy going to the best schools in Jamaica. My father's a military attaché who was sent here as a diplomat. So how empowered was I living in Jamaica? Now, growing up in Jamaica, because I've been brought up in a Western educated society, I did O-levels and A-levels the same as any of the top schools here. What did John Barnes feel about black people in Jamaica in the inner cities? I used to go and play football in Trenchtown and Tivoli Gardens. How did I view those black people, the black ones with big lips? Did I feel superior to them? Yes. You know why? Because society showed me that wrongly. That is why we have all been traumatized. And Layla mentioned it, I mean, Baby Blue mentioned it in terms of colorism. We've all been traumatized into seeing the image, the black image, not the black image of John Barnes or Layla or Jan or light skin with thin lips. I'm talking about the black image. And that is what we have to change. We have to change the negative perception of the black image. And we feel that the white people on the water are racist because we are completely fine, but we have been traumatized into turning away from that image and feeling that is not us. That is us. That is us. So when we see a black image or a black cartoon of a black man with big lips, a lot of black people get very offended and they say, why are they showing that image? Because that's not who we are. What about the black people who look like that? What are we saying? That we are superior to them? Because some black people look like that. So we have to accept it within ourselves that we are also traumatized by this whole idea of racial hierarchy. Why do you think our black kids are lighting their skin? Because we ourselves feel that that is superior. So it's okay for us to point the finger at white people. We have to look at ourselves. So the solution and moving forward. We know the history and the legacy of slavery and colonialism. We have to dismantle that, dismantle the whole, from a geneticist, biologist point of view, anthropologist. I don't know who their anthropologist was there. I don't know whether it was, I can't remember who said their major was anthropology. The whole idea of me being a different race to a white person because the gene that makes me black, rather than the gene that gives somebody blue eyes and brown eyes, race doesn't exist. But unfortunately, it does because we have now accepted it. So what's the problem with seeing race? And a lot of white people who say we don't see race. There's no problem with seeing race. There's no problem with seeing black, white, Chinese. There's no problem. It is the characteristics that we have ascribed to particular races. So when my friends, some white friends say, oh, I don't see color. Subliminally, they're actually saying that I see color, but I don't want to admit it because you're going to accuse me of being racist. And I say to them, why can't you see race? Why can't you see a black man? The problem you have is the unconscious bias that you have towards black people generally, which means that you may see that black person in a negative light. Now, once you meet that black person and you see that he's normal, he's like you, he's intelligent, you then elevate him out of blackness to then convince yourself that you're not biased because you have a black friend. You voted for Obama. You live next to a black person. You may even have married a black person. But how do you see the average black man in the street? And that is what we have to change, the perception of the average black man in the street. Now, for years, what we've been doing, and I'm not talking about black people, let's just look throughout history. What has happened since the Magna Carta to the French Revolution to the American Civil Rights Movement? What has happened is you have had an elite group of people who have lobbied the masses to say to them, help me to get more power and I will help you up the ladder. And what has happened is you've had an elite group of people, be it the barons of the lords from the Magna Carta, the middle classes from the Third Estate in the French Revolution. Just to bring up the Haitian Revolution was a fight between the free coloreds and the white French. They then got Toussaint Louverture on the blacks to be on their side. So that was to expediency. As much as we're trying to then say that you know, this was an altruistic or a moral war to free all slaves. That wasn't the original idea. The original idea was to get an elite group of people more power after the French Revolution for them to have the same rights as white people. So when we go through history and we look at what's actually happened, it's all about power. You can look at race, but it's all about power. It's all about being accepted. And what has to happen is you need to have a transactional benefit to allow certain people to come into your group. By that, what do I mean? I'm talking from a sporting perspective. I haven't got long, so I'll quickly get onto football and then we can get onto some questions. As a black footballer, as John Barnes came to England as a footballer, and I may have been racially abused, when I'm driving up the Holloway Road, going back to Watford on the coach, where we're having a nice meal with some nice wine, and some of the Arsenal fans, and it's not Arsenal fans because they're racist, because I'm sure Watford fans would have been racially abusing other black players. So I don't want football fans to say you're calling us racist. This was a feature of society. And people felt really sorry for me, and they said how terrible it must have been for me. And I always said that, well, you know who I feel sorry for? As I'm going up the Holloway Road, those fans who are shouting at me, I know if I played for Arsenal, they'll cheer me if I played well. If I played badly, I may get more abuse than the white players, but if I played well, they'll cheer me. So how real is this racist abuse in football? But as I'm going up the Holloway Road and these racist fans are throwing stuff at me, I see black people walking up Holloway Road, ducking into shops, hiding because of this racist abuse. Who's speaking for them? My black friends, when I first came to England as a 13-year-old boy, had to get to the ground 5 minutes after kickoff and leave 5 minutes early. Who's speaking for them? We're talking about an elite group of people going through hardship, whereby the majority of people, 99% of black people who go through this hardship every day, no one speaks for them. Racist abuse, banana skins coming on the football field. You know when that happens? That happens very rarely, and it happens not for 90 minutes. It happens for 10 minutes in a match and a few bananas come on the field. For the other 6 days of the week, John Barnes can drive his nice car to a restaurant, go into the front of the queue. Everybody accepts me because I'm John Barnes. It's not personal, it's because I'm John Barnes. So what racism did John Barnes face? For the 90 minutes, some bananas came on the field and I got racist abuse. Black people in the inner cities go through much worse than I have. Invisible banana skins and unspoken racism is thrown at them every single day of their lives when they go to work, where they live, the jobs they have. But because it is not overt racism like we see at football matches, we then feel that, oh, well, football is the problem or the police are the problem. What we should do as an elite group of people is start speaking for people less fortunate than ourselves. When I listen to black footballers talking about black footballers are going to be turned away from the game because of the racist abuse that they may get in Germany or in Bulgaria while they're earning £100,000 a week, I'll say, okay, give it up. Go back to your communities where you haven't got an education, access to social care, housing, if you want to see what real racism is like. So if you want to tackle racism, speak about that, because that affects 99% of people. That affects 99% of people. And if you talk about the power that footballers have or high-profile people have, rather than talking about the lack of black managers, the lack of black men in the boardroom, where we need more black men in the boardroom, and more black agents, look at what Marcus Rashford did. Now, you may say that's not a black issue, but it's an inner city underprivileged issue. He used his platform and his profile and his power to change government policy, which will positively affect millions of kids for years. What would have happened in the past, or what people said, is that he should have just given him his money. Yes, he could give him £200,000 a week. Sorry, he could give him £200,000. What would that do? That would feed him for a couple of months. Then after, what happens? He'll get a pat on the back to say, well done. But he used his platform not to talk about racism in Bulgaria, not to talk about the fact that there are no black managers, to talk about the fact that there are a group of people who are voiceless, who he can positively impact by doing what he did. Raheem Sterling say the same. They're fine young men. They're fine young men, but they're being advised by an elite group who want some of the pie, who say to Raheem and to the black players, when you have a press conference, say we need more black managers, say we need more black people in power, say we need that. If Raheem, rather than giving 250 cup semi-final tickets to Stonebridge Park, I used to play in Wembley, I know Wembley very well. Stonebridge Park is quite a rough area, knife crime problems. And he gives 250 cup semi-final tickets to people in Stonebridge Park. What Raheem should do is take those 250 kids into a press conference and say, these kids are being disenfranchised, not being given equal opportunities, vocational opportunities, access to social care. That's going to help them. 250 cup final tickets to do nothing till they get there again the following year. And that is what we should be doing. And that is what I do. But unfortunately, I'm being ostracized because people don't want to hear that. People with power want to hear that we want to get more elite people into power. So for years, as I mentioned, the Magna Carta, the French Revolution, you've had an elite group of people, forget black and white. We're talking about elite and the masses, who are saying to the masses, help me to get more power and I'll help you up. Wouldn't it be better if we can create an environment in the inner cities, a platform in the inner cities for kids to be able to get on that platform and climb up themselves, rather than hoping for one person to pull everybody up? That is what we have to do. That is what we have to do. So, as I said, I spoke a lot about the transactional benefits that white society has to see, because we need white society to be compliant with our efforts. People think differently. People think we can force our way in, and we have to show them what we can do. Now, if you think about the transactional benefit of being allowed to the top table, which is what happened from a sporting perspective years ago in baseball, Jackie Robinson, athletics. Now, the transactional benefit that white society saw was we can be successful if we get them on side. Now, from a sporting perspective, it's obvious, because you see Jackie Robinson hit a baseball, that's black and white. We know what he's going to give us. You see Muhammad Ali punching. You see Tommy Smith running the 200 meters. You see Usain Bolt. Is it a level playing field in sport? When a footballer takes a shot, do they make the goal smaller? A black footballer. When a black footballer plays against a white footballer, does he have 5 white footballers playing against one black footballer? No, it is a level playing field. It's not a level playing field in the industry in terms of black managers, black administrators, which I understand. And that is because they don't see the transactional benefit of having, yes, completely accepted black sportsmen, runners, boxers, singers. We can sing, we can dance, completely accepted. You know, we can act, but can we think? And until we change the perception of our moral and intellectual worth, nothing will change. And people think we can force our way up into the boardrooms. Until white society sees the transactional benefit, nothing will change. They saw the transactional benefit from a sporting perspective, because John Barnes can play football and he's a good, you know, and Luther Bishop can play football, and you know, whoever can box and whoever can run. But can we think? And that's what we have to change. Now, people say we have to get in there and change it while we're in there. The problem is that why that won't work. We have to make people change their perception before we get there. We have to change the perception of a black man's worth, and not a brilliant black man like Obama or Martin Luther King, because of course we then take them out of the negative black space, the way society sees black space as being negative. We elevate them out of those spaces and say, yes, they're brilliant, but not the average black person. It is the complete opposite in terms of the individualization of a black man's ability or a black man's failure. By that, I mean, as a black coach, if we're successful, as Frank Rijkaard was when he won the Champions League, we say, yes, Frank Rijkaard's successful. Why weren't they other black managers after that? Because we individualize his success to say, yes, he's successful, but can the others be? Whereas if he was unsuccessful, we then say black men can't be good managers because a black man has failed. It's complete opposite from a white perspective. If a white manager is successful, if Frank Lampard's successful, they aren't going to say white managers can be successful. But if he fails, they're not going to say white managers will fail. They're going to say Frank Lampard has failed. So they individualize his failures. Whereas for black people, we individualize his success to elevate them out of blackness. And that's what we have to stop doing, elevating or looking to get brilliant black people, which is what the Black Lives, if you look at Black History Month, for example, I'm not going to stay for very long, a few more minutes. Black History Month. What have we seen in Black History Month? We have seen brilliant black people for hundreds of years. We see brilliant black people, scientists. We've seen intellectuals. We've seen brilliant black people, and that makes us feel good. So that makes us feel good. Black History Month should be for white people, for them to see how good we can be, not just to make us feel good. Because the problem we have with that, if we're not going to create an environment to help our kids, and everybody here on the panel, as we've seen them, have come through adversity to actually get to where they had to be better than a white person to get to. So despite adversity, they got to where they got to, which is a fantastic, inspirational way to look at things to inspire our youngsters. But the reality is that for 99% of our youngsters, how can they become nurses or doctors or businessmen when they're going to be expelled when they're 14? And it's okay for me, John Barnes, with his nice big car, to turn up at a school and say, stay in school and work hard. Because in the environment that we live in, success is measured by the clothes you wear, by the shoes the car you drive, and the house you live in. And he knows, because he's not even going to be able to get an O level, the majority of them, and they're going to be expelled. It's okay that the odd one will elevate himself out of that, and despite his experiences, become brilliant. For 99% of them, they won't be able to do that, no matter what we say to them. So why don't we try and create an environment for them to grow, for them to develop, so that they can maximize their potential, rather than just picking on the ones who have been brilliant and say, there's an example. This is what you should be doing. Yes, we do have to do both. We do have to do both. But I feel that what the Black elite should be doing is trying to create environments in the inner cities, in our communities, to help the average Black man. Not just pick out the brilliant Black ones and say to everybody else, you can actually do that. So I'm going to finish there, but I just want to tell you a story about I always like to give analogies to life. I've been working in Africa for many years, and the Black community are very supportive of their heroes. And Black people feel sorry for me because they can't get a job as a manager, and Idris Elba can't get an Oscar, and Stormzy can't get an Emmy or whatever it is. And I'm supported every time I go to London and I go in the Black community, and people say, Barnsley's really hard. Can't believe that, you know, they're fighting against you because you can't get a job as a manager. This is the man sweeping the road as I'm going down past Westminster Bridge. You got a Black road sweeper sweeping the road. And he says to me, Barnsley, I can't believe that, you know, it's out of order. I'm going to march on Whitehall because we need Black managers, we need Black doctors, we need Black lawyers. And I said, what about you? What about you? What about your children? What do you want for your children? I want to fight for your children. I'm okay. And you know what he says? Well, that's just the way it is for us. That's just the way it is for us. The analogy I'm going to give you, if you bear with me just for 2 minutes, then I'm finished, is if you see a impala running for its life. I worked in Africa 1 week every month for 6 years, 12 times a year I was in South Africa, so I went all over, beautiful place. You see an impala running for its life, and the lion is chasing it, and it's fighting for its life. All of a sudden, the lion catches it, and the lion gets it around the neck. As the lion gets it around its neck, it is fighting for its life. It is struggling, it's kicking, it's trying to bite, then all of a sudden it gives up. It doesn't die, it gives up. You can see in its eyes, it's alive, but it has no hope. It has given up. You know why? Because when it was scrambling for its life, running around, nobody came to help. When it got caught, and it was fighting for its life for the first 10 seconds as the lion's jaws was around its neck, it was still fighting, no one came to help. Eventually it went, no one's going to help. No one's going to help. Why do I tell you that story? Because in Africa, I've been to the Congo, I've been all over Africa, to conflict areas. And when you listen, I'm going to tell you 3 groups of people. You listen to women in conflict areas in Africa, you listen to indigenous Americans and indigenous Australians, and they tell you their history. And just like the women in conflict in Africa, they say, and they speak dispassionately, completely desensitized to their experience. They say, the soldiers came and they killed everyone in the village. They killed all my kids, 20 of them raped me, and then they took me away. And she speaks as if it's nothing. Complete dispassionate, completely desensitized. You know why? Because when it was happening and she was shouting, help, help, no one came. No one came. Indigenous Americans say the same thing about 100 years ago when the soldiers came to the village while they were fighting and they were shouting and they wanted help. You listen to them speak now and they speak completely desensitized because no one cares and no one helps. Why am I telling you that? Because what did that man who's pushing the cart say to me? Barnsley, we're fighting for you. We want you to be a manager. You know what I mean? They're fighting you and you should be a manager, and then we need Rio Ferdinand and we need Stormzy. And I say to them, what about you and your family? And he goes, well, that's just the way it is for us. Have they given up hope for themselves and want to live vicariously through me to get some kind of empowerment and kudos because a black man has done well? Well, this black man is going to speak for them. This black man is going to speak for them, and that is what we should be doing. So until we change the perception of that man in the street who's sweeping the street, not the perception of John Barnes, because of course, yeah, we like John Barnes, because of course, yeah, John Barnes is, we're not racially biased because look, we love John Barnes and Rio Ferdinand and Obama. Until we change the perception of that black man in the street, nothing will change. And that is what my campaign is now, to change the negative perception of what black is. And then you will then see the transactional benefit of then thinking that we can have a manager because we believe them to be equal. Not just sportsmen, not just actors, because they are today's heroes. Yesterday's heroes in Black History Month were scientists, great people who did great things. Whereas now, P. Diddy's our hero, isn't he? And when we talk about Black Lives Matter, and I'll finish with this, which Black Lives Matter? There were 400 girls that went missing in Nigeria years ago. This is not a criticism of the Nigerian government. This is a criticism of ourselves, because we didn't march on anyone. We didn't demand that they get returned or something be done to get them back. We go what goes on in the motherland in Africa, the inequities that goes on in Africa. This is not a criticism of what goes on in Africa, because we know from colonial days when Africa was then colonized and it was split, divide and conquer, which is no surprise that there are no wars between African countries, just within them. Because when you put people who don't necessarily see themselves as an identity within a country like Nigeria, for example, you will have those problems. And white society looks at that and says, look at them, they're killing each other. Look at the knife crime problem in London. It's a black problem. They say that's a black problem. Black kids killing black kids. When it was white kids killing white kids in Glasgow 15 years ago, when it was a much bigger problem, did we see it as a white problem? No. That's what we have to do. We have to change the negative perception of blackness. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, John. There's so much in there to pick up on, which I'm not going to do now. The first thing I'm going to do is ask any of our panelists if they would like to ask each other questions before I start asking the questions that have been sent to me to ask of you. So first, to any of our panelists, Baby Blue, Jen, Elizabeth, Paulette, is there anything you would like to ask of each other, or any statements you would like to make now that you've heard what the other speakers have to say? No? Okay, I'm going to, I've now got quite a few questions. Some of them are directed to you as individually and some are more general. So I'm going to start with you, Dame Elizabeth. This is one for you from Sandra. Having worked in the NHS for a number of years, as well as your groundbreaking work in settling up Sickle Cell and Thalassemia Centre in the UK, why do you think the NHS has not progressed further and faster in achieving race equality, although implementing the RES a number of years ago?
We've heard from several speakers about structural racism. It's no good dealing with it at an individual or a local level. It's got to be done, you know, within the, from top down, and it's a political issue as well. I mean, who's holding the NHS accountable for this issue? If there's no penalties, if there's no, it's not going to affect their job. It's not going to affect their promotion prospects. It's not going to affect their pension pot. Well, so that's my response.
You're absolutely right, because listen, we mentioned the fact that the NHS, football, government, business, and the higher echelons of any industry is exactly the same. There's a lack of representation. And what we're doing is we're trying to once again individualize a problem to say it's a problem in the NHS. It's a problem in society because of the negative perception of a black person's ability mentally and intellectually to lead. So yes, we can have footballers and boxers and singers, but can we have thinkers? And that's what we have to change, that perception.
Okay, and a question from somebody called Michael Gervin for John Barnes. How much influence does class have on racism, not just from white people to black people, but also within the black community?
That's why the idea of racism is so nuanced, because, and Baby Blue mentioned it, it's not just about, you know, black and white. It's about discrimination or perceptions of different groups. So a middle-class light-skinned Jamaican to a dark black working-class Jamaican, I would feel superior to him because of what life has shown me. And that is what we have to understand. We can't just make it as, pardon the pun, as simple as black and white. So the whole idea of class, because I tell you, interestingly, there's a disenfranchised group who there's a negative perception of them, which you would never think. White English football managers. By that, I don't mean getting jobs, you know, for low division clubs and Southampton and Norwich. If the Liverpool, Arsenal, Man United, Chelsea job comes up, a white English manager will not be given the job. Can you believe that? That a white English manager being discriminated against, a white person. You know why that is? Not because he's white, because of the negative perception of white English managers, as opposed to Germans, Spaniards, Frenchmen. So it's a negative perception of any group. It doesn't have to be color. It could be women, as we know. It could be gays. So until we accept that it's all within us. Because if I was to ask the question to everybody now, would you rather go to war and fight beside a man and a woman? we wouldn't say what we really feel, because we'll lose our jobs and we'll get arrested and we'll be called, you know, sexist. But the reality is that because we have been wrongly told for hundreds of years that men are better than women in those capacities, then we all feel the same, but we don't want to admit it. So we have to have a truth and reconciliation, as I had in Rwanda, to admit how we really feel.
Okay, thank you. Next question is to Baby Blue. In 2020, the BLM process went global after the death of George Floyd. What can we as individuals and organizations do to continue the momentum for change?
I would say the primary ways in which we can change what's been going on and continue our activism is re-education, to think about how we can work to decolonize and unlearn white supremacy as a habit in our everyday lives. What are we choosing to consume in terms of media? Are we choosing to read a book about Black liberation instead of turning on the TV? It's these individual choices that allow us to decolonize and unlearn the white supremacy that we've been learning our entire lives. I think also it's about having conversations amongst one another, because society at large can be changed through our individual encounters with each other. And I think also just keeping ourselves safe. I think that recognizing the mental weight that is carried on every Black person because of our experiences with racism, or on women, or on people who are working class, or on students, to have a radical tenderness for each other, acknowledging that we need to take time for ourselves and time for each other in order to keep this resilience for the Black struggle.
Sorry to interrupt, I just saw a question coming up here where they asked me about Frank Lampard. I just saw the question saying Frank Lampard is white and English. The only reason Frank Lampard got the job at Chelsea was because he played for them for 10 years and he was a hero. Frank Lampard would never have been given that Chelsea job as a white Englishman had he not had that relationship with them. So when I talk about white Englishman at the top 5 clubs, that still holds true.
Okay, I have another question. It's to all the panelists. It says, thank you so much to the panel for sharing. What actions can we take so that we are not having these conversations in the year 2040? I like the statement of using anger for good. Any positive tips appreciated. And that was from Davina Brown.
I think, as I said before, is that we have to talk to the right people and sit around the table. If we continue to just have events for Black people talking to Black people, it's not going to work. I think it needs to be a wider discussion with everyone sitting around the table and looking at some strategies. And I hear what John says about, you know, our children and those people who are disadvantaged. We have to take all of that in consideration, but it's changed the perception of everyone around us around race and discrimination, and really holding people to account.
I think we have to look at ourselves rather than pointing the finger at others. We're very quick to point the finger at the ones who get caught and convince ourselves that we are not racially biased, or we're not sexist, or we're not homophobic. The only thing is that we haven't been caught. If you look at ourselves and say, how do we truly feel about different groups of people? And don't feel embarrassed, don't be ashamed, because we can't help it, because this is how we have been socialized and conditioned to think based on what has happened in the last 200 years, then we can look to move forward. But if you're not even willing to accept it, we can never start.
Okay. Another question to all panelists, and we are getting close to when we do have to close the session, I'm sorry. Thank you, John and Baby Blue, for bringing the wider perspective. It's so tiring explaining over and over again. We can and have achieved small wins, but do you think white people in power positions will ever change?
I don't think that this system will change unless we really recognize where this system has come from. Racism has been birthed out of capitalism, and capitalism thrives on white supremacy, on patriarchy, on ableism, and all of these disenfranchisements of groups of people. And that's because, like John was saying and emphasizing, that we base our interactions with each other on transactions. We see each other as things that we can take from each other instead of how we can build with each other. And so I don't think that we can change the system of racism, of oppression, without being anti-capitalist. So I know we don't have that much time, but I would encourage people to read anti-capitalist literature to actually explore what it is, because there is a large discourse that capitalism can save us from white supremacy, but it is in fact rooted in white supremacy. And I think it's very prevalent that we're talking about this at an NHS panel, because the NHS is a socialist system. It gives and provides medical attention to those when they might not be able to afford it. And I think if you are invested in the NHS, you are already invested in anti-capitalist ideas. And so I would encourage you to all read and educate yourselves on what the world could look like outside of capitalism and how that would benefit and reduce oppression.
100%. But I also think that if people see the transactional benefit of having women, having gays, having black people in their organizations, rather than just ticking numbers and going through the process of we have to have a certain amount of women without changing our perception of their worth, that's when it'll change. We have to really change our perception to give people a chance.
It's a reform, right? And I think that if we take those actions of seeing people's worth in an attempt to include people, it has to have the long-term vision of eventually eradicating systems where there are hierarchies in the first place.
So this is going to have to be the last question.
Sorry.
And I think it has been touched on really, and it really kind of falls into the category of what John Barnes talking about celebrity culture and the way we have invested so much of ourselves in celebrities and believe what happens to them is more important than what happens to poorer people and Joe Public. The whole issue of having black faces in high places and whether that really does make for structural change, and really taking some ownership on what we can do as individuals to make change. So here's the last question. While I agree with some of the opinions and ideas, what's wrong with pursuing in getting more black people to be part of the decision-making and controlling positions that are part of our systems like the NHS? I don't agree that black people are entirely to blame for the levels of adversity we have been facing in 2020. So I think it's been answered in terms of what's wrong with getting more black people to be part of the decision-making process. But since this is the driver for so much of the discussion now, which is to get black people in positions of power, in higher positions of authority, and believing that will make change, I'm going to end by asking all our panelists to just comment on whether that really is the way forward or whether we should be considering other ways of moving forward as well. Okay, so I'll go to Jen. What's your views?
My own views is that the idea of power is quite arbitrary. What do we mean by power? Sometimes we see black people get in position of power, if we want to take the analogy of Obama, who wanted to change things, and we see that much of his legacy is dismantled. But it's not just about position of power, it's about the consensus of change, and we have to have creative imaginings if we want to change things.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, any comments?
Yeah, it's getting late at night, and
okay.
We just need the revolution, don't we? Really. Just from a personal point of view, I was invited to be a guest on Desert Island Discs, and I love music, and music I find music better at helping me with my emotions than people sometimes. I'm being quite honest. And you're asked to choose out of your 8 tracks, which particular one would you select? And I chose Nina Simone. I just wish, you know the one, I'm tired. Who can remember? Who listened to it? Come on, this is a test of memory now.
Yeah,
I wish I could be free. I wish. Come on, help me out.
I knew how it felt to be free.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That the lyrics of that song are my values,
okay.
and I suppose we all get a bit down because can we realise that? But we just try.
Okay, Paulette, some last words from you.
What I would say is that there are many strands to make it happen. It's not just one. Power is power, but I think having power on your own will not work. You need the team and the people around you. You know, having power on its own won't work. We need all sorts around us to make it happen. Different strands, different ideas, different thinking. The important thing, let us talk to a wider group of people. Sit around the table. Let's not just talk to ourselves. Let us not just have Black History Month where we talk about things about Black in October. Those are the things that we need to change. You know, we need things that are consistent. So from this meeting, what do we do every month? How are we going to ensure that the outcome from this today is going to make a positive and different change right across the community? But I think it's working together, different strands, different strategy. Don't give up. That's important. Never give up. Use adversity to your strength and to your opportunities. Okay. And I think we will move forward.
Thank you very much. Baby Blue, some last words from you?
I think that the way to decolonize or eradicate oppression in the NHS would be to eradicate the culture of white supremacy in the NHS. And that can be done by recognizing that because the NHS has elements of white supremacy in it, Black people within that system are capable of uplifting that white supremacy. I think Obama, which people have praised so much in this discussion, I'm not really a big fan, but he was part of a white supremacist institution. And so he was very able to enact the same violence that he's supposed to represent the counter for. You know, the prevalence of Black women being 5 times more likely to die as a result of childbirth, those Black women might have Black midwives, but the system is poisonous. And so we need to actually eradicate the culture of white supremacy in the NHS instead of just getting Black faces in white spaces. We need to create a space free of oppression through re-education.
So John, anything to add from what you've told us today? Very thought-provoking stuff.
Yeah, the only way you're going to do that is if we change the perception of a Black person's worth. So as Baby Blue says, people have to get into those positions, but what's the point of getting in those positions just because we have to tick boxes to put people in those positions when we don't believe in their worth? So we have to believe in their worth before they get in that position. So we have to change perceptions. And I'll use the Rooney Rule as a typical example. The Rooney Rule in 2003 came into being to give Black people a chance to get into the NFL. They had 3 Black coaches in 2003. The Rooney Rule came into effect. 2020, they've got 3 Black coaches because they've given them the job without believing that they can actually do the job. So you can't just give somebody a job because they won't stay in that job. We have to change the perception of someone's worth and their ability, then you'll see an improvement.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I now have to thank everybody. I want to thank the speakers. The chat has indicated, and also some of the text messages I've been getting, that this has been a really thought-provoking exercise, really thought-provoking. And the question has been asked, what happens next in Croydon? What are we going to do after this forum to ensure that there's real change? And that's something that just in the forum have to take forward. This event would not have been possible, as I've said at the beginning, without the support of Andrea Stewart in the comms team, of the EDI team of Arlene Brown, Sandra Myers-Edwards and Hannah, my co-chairs, Jen Sarsby, Andrea Benjamin and Beverly Wright. So thank you to them from me, and I think from all of us, for being able to put this together. I know there were some technical difficulties at the beginning with people joining, and for that I will say that this will be available. We're going to send this out to all the people who signed up for today's event, and we're also going to share with you some other information which we hope will be of interest to you. So some TED Talks and some other articles which we hope are going to stimulate a conversation about some of the issues which we talked about today. The film, which apart from its glitches is really brilliant, and people have said they appreciate it despite that. And that will also be made available to everybody who's attended the forum. Matthew, you've come on screen, and I take it you'd like to say something. Yes? We can't hear you.
Just very quickly, Leila, I don't want to distract from the fantastic conversation we've had, but on behalf of the organisation, I think it is appropriate for me just to say a couple of words. 3 things really. First is This isn't a, well, let's do this once and then pack this away and bring something out next October or whenever. This needs to be part of a commitment, which I think we have made organisationally, to work with our BME Forum and pursue this as a real central part of our work. So that's a commitment I know Mike would endorse, to continue this endeavour with our BME network and indeed the whole organisation. I was really taken by the discussion about, do you focus on promoting, I thought Baby Blue's comment about black faces into white spaces. If that's all we do, I think John's point is that's not enough. That's not to say that's a bad thing in and of itself, but it's clearly not going to be enough. What we need to do is also systemically look at what the issues are, why they're there, and what we need to resolve those issues. And just putting a few more people of colour on our board table isn't the answer. That's not necessarily wrong as a part of the progress we need to make, but it's not enough. And what we need to resolve to do is do both and that would be my learning from this evening. And I think I thank all the panelists and indeed all the people who have contributed on the chat to a fantastic debate. I have definitely learned a lot, and if part of the opportunity here was to understand more from my own personal position and my responsibility as chief executive here, then that's definitely had an impact on me, and I thank everybody for that.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Just one thing I have to say, Croydon BME Forum have organised a series of events in Croydon, and we do have a quiz coming up on the 20th of October. So please sign up to our quiz to test your knowledge of British Black history. It should be a lot of fun. And so we look forward to seeing you then. So as much of the chat is saying, thank you all very, very much. It's really been worthwhile. I'm really proud to have been part of this and to have been able to host this event. It's meant a lot. So thank you all and good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. All the best. Thanks, everyone. All the best. Take care.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Well done, Layla.
Yes, hello.
Well done, Layla. Super.
Oh, thank you very much, Matthew. That's a good deal.
It's very hard work running those things. I think you did beautifully.
Oh, thank you very much.
Well done, Layla. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Really good.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you.
You need to lie down now, Layla.
I do. I need a drink, Matthew, and I don't drink. Right. Thank you. Bye.
Go and have a glass of squash.
Okay. Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Cheers, Andrea.
Bye. Yeah, see you.